Well, I am very thrilled to be partnering with R3 Ministries and Brother Greg Joyner. Brother Greg is a man that truly has a heart for God's men. And likewise, Advanced Pastoral Concepts, which is my ministry, we likewise want to help the men of God in this generation as much as possible. In fact, my mission statement is that APC is committed to consulting, coaching, and caring for the shepherd so that the shepherd can grow and mature into a steward of a balanced biblical ministry in the 21st century. And so with those thoughts in mind, we have put these videos together as we're talking about money and marriage in ministry. Video 1, we talked about the biblical foundation for stewardship. Secondly, the second video, practical instruction about personal finance. And then this video is going to really delve into church finance and church administration. You know, hopefully after 32 years that God has allowed me to be in full-time ministry, I trust that maybe some of my experiences that I have had, particularly in church finance, and I'm going to take just a little bit of time in this opening video, part of this video, to tell you just a little bit of some of the ministries that I've had over the years as it relates to church finance, and maybe you can likewise kind of see what your situation has been over the years, or maybe even where your situation is now, or where you find yourself, and maybe be able to go to the next level because of those things that we've all learned together. You know, I had a privilege really of growing up in a preacher's home. You know, so truly my experience started even as a child. And kind of just watching my father in a new church plant, and even having him to be bivocational, and watching him try to balance those things. And then the Lord allowed him to go to a little larger ministry, and we watched that ministry grow from just a small handful of people to over 250, starting a Christian school and all the things that go with that, even some building projects along the way. And I remember as a child just watching how things in the ministry would move forward. You know, and then fast forward to Bible college days, and I think about some of the teaching and training that we had, and to be honest, you know, we can't learn everything in 4 years of Bible college that we're going to need for a lifetime of ministry. And, you know, to be quite honest, there were just a few classes and subjects taught along these lines about fiscal management and church administration. And so, you know, really, my experience really in earnest as a full-time minister began when I was in Anderson, Indiana, my first ministry, where my pastor allowed me to sit in on some deacons meetings and trustee meetings, a little bit of the development of budgets and learning even how to take on missionaries and fund missions conferences. And really looking back on it, that was a great part of my beginning to understand really how church money works. And then at the age of 26, the Lord allowed me to have my first ministry. You know, I was the senior pastor at the age of 26. And to be honest, we didn't, any of us, know what we should have known at that time. And so a lot of it was trial and error and just kind of watching and gaining experience as we moved along. And probably that's why the Lord allows most of us to start very small, right? And so those small group of folks and that congregation, as it then began to grow, whether it was in the church, on the church side or in the Christian school, we had 8 students when we began, you know, learning to have tuition payments that would be made, and then having to bring on staff, and then how do we pay those staff members. We started with 8 missionaries, and they were even at that point a little bit behind in the monthly payments, and so I had to find a way to catch that up, and then starting Faith Promise Missions there and introducing that concept. And, you know, the Lord really was so good that in those early years of ministry, we were able to learn these lessons fairly quickly. And so, you know, those first 18 months, things began to grow, and to God be the glory. We were looking about expanding and having to expand sanctuary space. And so I'll never forget in 98, as we had just gotten debt-free and burned our mortgage, we then began to really look in earnest about building on to our facility. And so we added a 300-seat sanctuary at that time. And again, just looking back, these were very exciting days, but they were also in some ways stressful days, because you got to pay for these items, and hiring your first staff and getting that first major loan for construction, and we'll talk in just a little while as we give you some thoughts about this. But even developing good relationships with your bankers and so forth, so that your books are in order, and so that you're able then to take these steps. And so from 98 to 2003, we were enjoying really continued growth in both church and school. We had the facilities now to be able to house the added attendance. But we began to understand that this was not going to be forever. And realizing the amount of property that we had, we saw that we were going to have to purchase more property. And just due to some county regulations and building sizes. So in 2003, we found a piece of property, 48 acres, just a piece of farm ground. We realized that we were going to have to bring in all of the utilities and all of the underground structure and parking lots, and just, it was a huge endeavor. And so once again, another learning curve is taking place. In 2004, we kicked off a 3-year giving campaign. We called it Boundless Vision. Again, just another piece of learning how to be able to get funds for what we need in the church. Obviously, we know that God's plan is always best, and that is that His people will fund the ministry. But the Bible talks about tithes and offerings, and so we had to just keep the ministry running with the tithes, but we had to cast some vision for our people in the area of offerings and giving over and above. And so that 3-year giving program, we raised over $600,000 cash. We put that then with the monies that we were going to get from the sale of the current properties. And then, of course, we talked to our local bankers about borrowing the rest. And again, I'm just saying, I'm trying to give you a real life example truly of where we were and how we were going to try to accomplish the building of this $4 million complex. You add into that missions and missions growth and church planting and all of the things that we were still continuing. And, you look at that picture of that building right there and you just thank God for what He did. But it could not have been done had there not been some good stewardship principles that had been put into place. So that was kind of my first part as a senior pastor of learning about building and growth and such. But in 2013, then the Lord led me to the ministry where I have been for the last 9 years, up until January of 2022. And to be honest, it was a totally different scenario. It was an established work, over 40 years old when I went there, and or a little older than that. But an established work and a core group of people, facilities and buildings and multiple buildings, not just church, but also a large Christian school. But because of a split that had taken place and obviously a large departure of not only people and students in the school, but even staff, that was what I walked into. And it was a difficult season. A very discouraged church family, and to be honest, a destroyed church budget. And many times I asked the Lord, why? Why would you send me to a situation like this? And again, I think there's learning always that is involved in all situations, and sometimes we just have to learn by doing. But we also had to learn to give it to the Lord. A lot of prayer and obviously the power of God that came and helped us in situations where we were at the end of our rope. And then really the preeminence of Jesus Christ. And when I say that, I say the church belongs to the Lord. It's not ours. It belongs to Him, and He's going to take care of His church. But listen, Pastor Shepherd, let's remember that we are placed there under the guidance of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ to truly give leadership to the flock. And so as a shepherd, we must learn these concepts so that we can even take a bad situation, a difficult season, and be able to learn what God is doing and exercise the faith to get you through to where God wants the church to be. And so to God be the glory. After 9 years of just faithful stewardship in all areas, the Lord allowed us to eat down the debt. The Lord allowed us to cash flow about $750,000 of capital projects. We increased our missions giving. Our Christian school went from a low of 65 students after the split to 165, and obviously tuition and salaries, teacher salaries, and being able to add these staff positions, all of that to the glory of God was able to be reclaimed in 9 years. Now, that's just a quick synopsis of what my experiences have been and what I've learned. And so what I'd like to do is, in the remainder of this video, to be able just to take some very practical thoughts. And I don't know where you are, and every situation is a little bit different, and obviously every situation is unique. And whether or not you already have facilities, or maybe you're trying to decide about building your first facility or adding on, maybe you're still in a rented facility and you're trying to think about how you can get a piece of property to build upon or to purchase something to make it your own. I think what I'm about to tell you here in this video will give you some very practical thoughts about church finance and church administration. So with that background being said, let me give you some general thoughts and some observations and maybe even some suggestions about church finance. Number one, I'd like to say we must all develop and live within a budget. Now, obviously, if you listen to the last video where we talked about personal finance, we talked at length about a personal budget. Well, you know, the same is true, and maybe even more so, because you're dealing with more money. You're dealing not with just one family, you're dealing with multiple families. You are dealing with so many other things. You're talking maybe of salaries for staff members and maintenance and upkeep on larger buildings. So you've got to learn how to budget. Obviously, budgets deal with income and outgo. And so income, obviously, would be the tithes and the offerings. And again, we understand that in a church setting, we're not selling a product. And so obviously a lot of faith has to be exercised, and I'll say in a moment, but a lot of vision and leadership must be exercised to cast the vision to the people so that the income remains strong. We also know, as we've done this for a long time, that there are cycles of income, right? You're going to maybe have lower offerings in the dead of winter, maybe right after Christmas time in January. You're going to maybe have some down seasons in the summer months when folks maybe go on vacation. And you're going to have to learn to watch and analyze these trends. And you do that based on a budget. You've got to know what your income is, what your outgo, what the necessity and expenses are, and then can be able to develop as you move along. As a side note, let me also say you can have either a calendar budget, that's January to December, or you can have a fiscal budget, which would be sometime during the year to 11 months later. We did it where the church was a calendar budget and the school was a fiscal budget, but whatever fits in your situation. The second thing I'd like to give to you is this thought. Institute a spending freeze if necessary. Now, what I mean by that is, depending on your situation, it may just that you need to get back on track. Let's just say things have kind of gotten out of control, or maybe there's not been a budget and you're just not really sure where you even stand. You could institute a spending freeze for a period of time, whatever that period is, that every expense must go to the desk of the pastor. And that's what I did even at my last ministry, a very large ministry. I had to tell all of my staff members if they wanted to purchase anything, there needed to be a purchase order that came to my desk, and I had to approve it. Why? We were trying to get back on track. And we even do this too at the end of each calendar year. We choose a date, usually in the middle of December, And we say, look, to the end of the year, there's no spending whatsoever. And what that allowed was all the checks to clear. We could then pay any credit cards there that had been purchased on for that month. Everything is kind of brought back to zero, as it were, and gives a couple of weeks there for you then to start January 1 kind of with a clean slate. So this is a good thought if you're in a difficult situation or need to get back on track. The third thought I'd like to give you is to review accounts and vendors annually for savings. You know, we always ought to be looking in every arena where we can save some money, because again, this is not our money, this is the Lord's money. And so I would encourage you to look at the accounts and vendors. And if you're in a larger ministry, maybe you would have someone in your business office that could kind of do this for you or with you. Maybe a trusted associate pastor, maybe you work on it together. But there may need to be some conversations that are had by the vendors. Maybe you'll look at the contracts to see how much longer are you in a contract. I remember when I first went to this last ministry, we had a copier, in fact, multiple copiers, and they were much larger than we needed, and we were paying thousands of dollars a year, more than we really needed to, and we saved a lot of money just by looking at these accounts and vendors. So I would encourage you to do that. Number 4, and I just mentioned it a moment ago, but develop a good relationship with your local bank. I have always liked working with local banks in my towns. There's just something to be said, especially in a smaller town setting, with having someone you can pick up the phone. They know you and you know them, and you can have multiple meetings, maybe even throughout the year, at least an annual time, where you sit down and you kind of look over your accounts, maybe the loan that you have with that bank. Just developing that relationship will pay you great dividends. I remember just a few years ago when interest rates were much lower than they are now. I remember my banker actually contacted us and wanted to modify our loan with a lower interest rate. And you say, well, why would a bank do that? Well, I'll tell you why. Because about $1.5 million went through their bank annually, just through our budgets, our school and missions and general fund. They wanted to keep us as a good client. And so they were looking out for our best interest, and we likewise were taking advantage of that good relationship that we had built. So this would be something that I would encourage you to do if you haven't already. Number 5, and boy, this is key right here. Transparency will win you trust. Now, obviously, we always need to be as transparent as possible when it comes to money. We know that money is a sticky situation in some people's minds, right? Some people maybe have been at churches before they came to yours where there wasn't transparency. Maybe where there was even some absconding of funds that should not have been, or things that were done that were unethical and maybe even illegal. So obviously you want to be above board in every one of these areas. Let me give you some thoughts here about how to be transparent with your church family. You know, number 1, I would suggest weekly reports. You know, maybe in the bulletin you could list how much came in last week comparative to what the budget is. Quarterly treasurer's reports. Obviously, annual budgets that you put out so the church family knows what we're spending there, and the different needs and the areas there. And then lastly, even the pastor's philosophy and your mindset. Just be transparent. Talk about it. Talk about it on Sundays. Maybe take some special time, maybe at a business meeting where you are allowing them to know what your mindset is, maybe about debt, getting out of debt, or as it relates to future building and maybe some of the needs, or taking on missionaries. Be very transparent, and this will win you great trust. Number 6, you must develop a trusted relationship with, and I'm going to give you 5 areas that I think are very important to do this. Number 1, a development of a relationship that is trusted with deacons. Now, I understand that every church is a little bit different in what their setup is. Deacons, I believe, are a biblical office. The Bible's very clear in the New Testament about that. I worked very hard to have a good working relationship with my deacons. We would meet monthly, and obviously go over the business for the month and things that were happening and keeping them kind of on track with me. That paid great dividends in my own leadership. But the second set of men within my deacon board was then a board of trustees. And so whereas deacons are a biblical office, trustees would be more of a legal office. And obviously you know what your state is, or maybe need to look into what your state demands that you have to make sure that you're compliant with the law. But trustees, in many cases, if the church was going to borrow money, they would have to be the ones that would sign those documents. So the trustees were the ones I worked with really about money issues. The hammering out of the budget in the fall season, and then taking that to the Board of Deacons, getting it approved, and then, of course, to the church body. So, but again, a trusted relationship is what you're building. Number three, with the congregation. Now, according to your constitution, you may have to look and see what things must be brought to the congregation, what things must be voted on. But again, you want there to be an attitude of trust between the two of you. You don't want there to be an adversarial relationship between you and the congregation. And then the last two here kind of go hand in hand. Number four, lay business owners inside your church. You want to really get them on board with you. These are men and ladies that maybe own their own businesses. They're already good with money. They understand administration. You want to show them that likewise you are doing your best on the church side. And so you want to develop the good relationship there. And then lastly, with local business owners in your community. And this is just a good thing to do just because of making sure that the church has a good testimony in the community. And I won't go into all the areas. We had a Christian school, and there was some advertising even in our gymnasium that allowed them to invest in a big scoreboard. Just things like that these two things can kind of work together. So it worked well for us and has over the years. Number 7. As the pastor, you need to learn to lead and cast a vision. What I did every January was I had, and I know a lot of churches do this, they have what they call a Vision Sunday. I had what I called a State of the Church address. And I would do it every year. And it would be really my vision casting Sunday. We would talk about the previous year. This is where I would put a PowerPoint together, and I would go over what the income was and what our in relation to our budget and how many new missionaries did we pick up, and on and on. Just leading and casting a vision. And you're going to need to find that in your situation to your congregation. But I promise you, it will enable folks to truly follow your lead because they know you're going somewhere, and you know how to get them there as well. Number 8, I think we all as pastors have to learn this, to preach and teach on the whole scope of stewardship. Not just about tithing, not just about the giving part of stewardship. Stewardship is time, talent, and treasure, right? Tithing, not just tithes, but also offerings, whether that be faith promise or maybe giving extra for capital projects. These are things that you're allowing your people to be a part of, and that you need to preach from the Word of God these principles. And even things about personal finance. The second video gave you a lot of information. Feel free to use that information, maybe in teaching in a finance class for your young couples or whatnot. It needs to be something that you're good at, something you understand, so that people can get the help that they need. So I would encourage you about that. Number 9, and this goes without saying, but Pastor, lead the way in giving. I'm talking about you personally. I'm talking about your tithe. I'm talking about you giving to Faith Promise Missions. I'm talking about when a capital improvement campaign is presented, that you're leading the way in that. I mentioned a little bit ago back in 2004, and that 3-year giving campaign. My wife and I, we gave heavily to that. Again, over and above tithe, over and above missions, over and above school tuition, we gave heavily. And we watched the Lord give back to us. In fact, I tracked it over those 3 years. And without giving you any numbers, it was amazing to see what God did, just because we wanted to be leading in that area of giving to our church family. Number 10, use a church ministry software program. I would really encourage you to do this, more than just for finances, but there are some really great software programs out there that would track attendances and track facility maintenance issues, could track membership and donations and just all the things that are going to be so important to stay organized in a ministry. And if you have any thoughts about that or questions, feel free to reach out to me. I'd be glad to help you and give you some guidance along the way. Now, number 11 kind of goes with number 10, and this is more for you as a pastor. Learn to read and understand then these financial reports. You know, especially if it's a new system, you're going to have to take some time to learn to read them. Work closely with your treasurer or the person that works in your business office. But every Monday morning, there were certain reports that I wanted given to me on my desk from the day before's offering. And obviously, this would be after the monies were counted and everything was done and bank deposits made. But I wanted to see where we were. You know, we've got to know what the state of our flocks are, right? And so you got to learn to read these reports and know what funds are, how much you have in surplus funds, how you're doing in relation to budget, and all of this. So, and even your mortgages, you know, what percentage of debt do you have in your ministry? So these are known by having these reports and knowing really what they mean. Let me go to number 12 here. Invest in staff. Can I encourage you that this is probably one of the scariest things maybe to do at the beginning before you've hired anybody. But can I also say to you that when you hire the right people and you're able to pay them well, and we'll talk about that in just a minute, and able to get them on your team, great things can take place in your church. And so I would encourage you to look about investing at the right time, at the right moment, and make sure you get the right kind of person for sure. And then to give them a livable salary and benefits, retirement, making sure that you're taking care of these things, I promise you will pay you great dividends. Number 13, I'd like to give you this thought. Lead the trustees to invest in a senior pastor pension versus an ongoing retirement package for life. And without getting into the weeds on this, and if you have questions, I can certainly give you some thoughts about it, some things that I've done over the years. But for the senior pastor, I think the church must be willing and even led to take care of the senior pastor, especially someone that maybe stays there long term. But instead of at the end of that person's tenure, either by retirement or even by death, and there's maybe a widow left, and then the church is still taking care of those families until the passing away, that can really be a hardship to the church in the present moment. And so investing in a pension along the way, and then when that person either passes on or that person moves to a different ministry or even just retires, you've already placed money in that where then that pension can go with them. So just something for you to think about, very important. Number 14, invest in a key man insurance policy. This would be something that would protect the church, especially if there's a mortgage on the church. Key man really is a term that insurance companies use. It's not just for churches, it's in business as well. But when the key person maybe would pass away unexpectedly, it's a life insurance policy where the beneficiary would be the actual church. And you take a church that's got $1 million mortgage, and let's say you take $1 million key man policy out. Something were to happen while you're going through the difficulty of grieving and trying to find a new pastor. Maybe finances go down. Boy, you could be debt free. That church could just the mortgage goes away, or it's money that can get the church through a difficult season. So very important. If you have any questions on that, I can help you as well. And then lastly, number 15. We'll just kind of wrap this thought up here. Remember that church money should not monopolize your time and attention. However, you must give it some time and attention, just like studying for your sermons, just like counseling, just like preparing for activities at church. You got to spend some time on it. And I believe that church administration also needs some time devoted to it as well. Church finance. So I hope that these thoughts have been what you have needed, maybe as a refresher. maybe as some new things that you had not thought about. And again, I know that Brother Greg Joyner would say at R3, and then of course myself with Advanced Pastoral Concepts, we are here to help. And if we can do so in any way, shape, or form, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. So these 3 videos, money and marriage in ministry, and I pray God's richest blessings upon you and yours and your ministry for the cause of the Lord Jesus Christ in these days. God bless you.